Well, what is the significance of the wearing of the veil by Muslim women? Let's start the conversation there this evening with Amira El-Gawabi. She is the Human Rights Coordinator for the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Thank you for coming to speak with me again.
Thanks,
good to see you. Let's start with
great, confident,
because that's where it comes down to. And I'm a strong feminist in this country as well, too. And I do believe that women should have the ability to show their face.
Well, what is the significance of the wearing of the veil by Muslim women? Let's start the conversation there this evening with Amira El-Gawabi. She is the Human Rights Coordinator for the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Thank you for coming to speak with me again.
Thanks,
good to see you. Let's start with your reaction to the Prime Minister's comments that the wearing of the veil by Muslim women is as he put it in the House of Commons yesterday, a practice rooted in a culture that is anti-women. What's your response to that?
I think I was extremely disappointed to hear, again, this sort of rhetoric coming from the Prime Minister of Canada. In terms of saying that the niqab is rooted in a culture that is anti-women, I think we have to sort of step back a little bit and just understand what we are talking about here. We are talking about a woman's free choice to cover her face out of a sincerely held religious belief, which is a protected charter right in Canada. And I think most women would agree that it's anti-women to tell us what we can and cannot wear. So it's sort of rolling back the clock on women's rights a little bit.
Let's pick up on what you said. We've heard a number of ministers and conservative MPs questioning whether this is a cultural practice, the wearing of the niqab, a cultural practice, or a religious practice. Which is it?
And I understand that there is confusion around it, and I think what we have to, again, is just go right back to the Supreme Court's decision in the case of NS, which was a woman who wanted to wear the niqab while she was testifying in court. What the Supreme Court said then is that it's not up to the courts, and in this case, not up to the Prime Minister or any other minister of government, to decide what is a valid religious belief, as long as there's some kind of nexus in religions, which there is in this case. There are some interpretations of Islam where they believe, a woman believes that she wants to get closer to God by covering her face. So as long as there's no security concerns, identification concerns there, as long as there's nobody else's freedoms being infringed upon, in Canada, as a free society, people and women have a right to wear what they want.
This debate began with, or sort of was refueled, I think, with the government's decision to appeal the federal court ruling last month that said a Muslim woman did not have to remove her niqab when taking the oath of citizenship, saying the existing law only requires that someone sign an oath, sign a form saying they've taken the oath. The government says, you know, it's fundamental to the notion of transparency and Canadian values that a woman reveal her identity if she's taking the oath of Canadian citizenship. What is your response to that?
Well, it's very important for a woman or anyone to reveal their identity at taking the oath. And, for example, this woman, Ms. Zanira Ashaik, and other women who do wear the niqab will always remove it when it's required. So in the case of the citizenship oath, she has no problem to remove the veil, identify herself, sign the required papers. But when she's taking the oath, there is an implied understanding that everyone in that room is saying the words, and, you know, there's no lie detector test to make sure that everybody is sincere. You know, she is there. She's saying, I want to be Canadian. I want to be part of the Canadian family. I uphold the values and the laws of this land. And I think it's a practice that's been going on for a long time until Minister Jason Kenney, back then he was the immigration minister, until he decided, you know, let's not allow this to happen, which it, as the federal court says, was an illegal policy. Right,
and the government is appealing that, and we'll see where that goes.
Right.
I mean, is there a consensus view of the wearing of the niqab within the Muslim community?
Well, I think I would have to say that there's so many different views of how Islam is practiced, and I think that it's not up to me. I mean, we're a human rights and civil liberties organization. We're not a theological organization, and I think that as a Muslim woman myself, I'm not about to tell someone, well, yes, you can wear niqab, no, you can't wear hijab, or vice versa. I think we are women who have freedom to choose. There was a survey actually done by the Canadian Council of Muslim Women of women who wear niqab, and not one single woman said, for example, that she was coerced into wearing it. She said that this was a free choice that she made here actually in Canada, and that they still continue to be contributing citizens. And I think it's really important also to just, again, we're talking about a tiny minority of women. First of all, the vast majority of Muslim women don't even wear a headscarf, right? And a smaller minority wear the hijab, and then a very tiny minority wear the niqab. So we have to also question, like, why is this being made such a humongous issue right now?
Why do you think it is?
Well, I think the government really needs to answer those questions because we have much more serious things to discuss. For example, right now, the Bill C-51, where we as Canadians have to decide how do we balance security, which are very important, legitimate concerns, and civil liberties, which are also important. So these are the sorts of discussions and debates that we should be having, not to decide whether or not a woman who has the right in Canada to cover her face if she chooses to, whether she should do so or not. I feel that it's definitely kind of, you know, getting people to viscerally react to Muslims, when in fact Canadians and Canadian Muslims are just as concerned about other issues that we need to hear our elected officials speaking about.
Let me come back to again so that our audience is clear. Because this is the argument they're hearing, the government's position is, look, this is a cultural issue. It's not a religious issue, wearing the niqab. So I want to come back to that because I'm not sure I understood your first. So is the wearing of the niqab a religious-based practice, or is it a cultural-based practice?
Yeah, no, it definitely has a nexus in religion. Some people do find evidence in their faith and interpretation that it's better for a woman to cover her face. So definitely has a nexus in religion. There is no doubt about that.
Okay, and you're making the point that if some Muslim women take that position, then that is their religion. It becomes a religious right and a right for them. Okay.
Absolutely, it becomes a protected charter right.
Some have suggested that allowing the wearing of the veil at the citizenship ceremony and the debate that's been triggered about that may actually foster intolerance against Muslims by allowing it. How do you see that argument?
The reality is that many of the Canadians who sometimes feel anti-Muslim sentiment are women. So obviously I'm visibly Muslim when I walk in the street. I'm wearing a hijab. When a Canadian woman wears a niqab, she's obviously Muslim, and people may react to her negatively because of perhaps misconceptions, misunderstandings, whereas when people actually get to know Canadian Muslims, they understand that, you know, we're part of the community, we're very involved in the society. So certainly this kind of rhetoric is not going to help people understand that Canadian Muslims we are contributing to Canada as much as we can positively, just like everyone else, and B, that our religious practices are protected rights in this country, and that these freedoms are something we cherish in a democracy.
Okay. Amir El-Gawabi, thanks for coming in to speak with me and to give us your views on this debate as it continues to take place here in Canada. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.